It was a cold day in 1643. The farmer in southern Iceland did not know what he had. He held a book. The vellum pages were thin and dry. As they smelled of dust and time. The book was called the Codex Regius, the king's book. For generations, it had passed through his family, a strange heirloom nobody could quite read. It was just the old book from the barn. That year, it came into the hands of Brynjolfur Sveinsson, the Bishop of Skalholt, where he was a collector, a man who saw history where others saw clutter. He opened the codex. The script was Stark, written in a steady hand sometime around the year 1270. As Bishop Brynjolfur turned the fragile pages, he found a collection of poems. Old poems, older than any saga he knew. They were the stories of the gods, the Eddic poems, thought lost to the world. And the first poem, the most powerful, was Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress. He read the words, and the world outside his window seemed to fade. The seeress spoke of creation. She spoke of the great tree Yggdrasil. She spoke of the gods in their prime. But then her tone shifted. She spoke of the end. Her words painted a picture of absolute desolation. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact, a fate that was already written. She described a future where the sun, the giver of all life, would turn black. A dark, dead stone in the sky. Then the earth itself, the very ground he stood on, would lose its foundation. It would sink into the churning, boiling sea. Everything would be water and darkness. The bright stars, the guides for sailors and dreamers, would fall from the heavens like stones. The prophecy was clear. This was Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. And it was a cataclysm that no one, not even the most powerful beings, could escape. And the seeress stated it plainly. Odin, the Allfather, would die. Thor, the mighty protector of mankind, would also fall. There was no victory, there was only the end of everything. The bishop sat there, the weight of those 800-year-old words pressing down on him. The farmer had no idea he had been sleeping next to a detailed account of the apocalypse. Number 16, the world will not end, it will be reborn. Dr. Elise Brandt adjusted her glasses. The year was 1998. She sat in a sterile library office at the University of Oslo, surrounded by books that smelled of aging paper and binding glue. Outside, the city was alive with traffic and the hum of modern life. Inside, she was looking at a world of ash and water. She was a folklorist, but she felt more like an archaeologist digging through layers of meaning in ancient texts. Her focus for the past decade had been the last stanzas of the Völuspá. Everyone focused on the destruction. The wolves, the serpents, the fire, the end. But Elise was obsessed with what came after. The poem did not just stop with the earth sinking into the sea. It continued. After the chaos, a new earth would rise. It would be green and beautiful. The water would recale, and fields would grow without ever being sown. This wasn't an ending. It was a reset, a complete and total reboot of the cosmos. The terrifying part for Elise was the sheer indifference of it. The universe did not care about the old gods. It did not care about humanity's struggles or triumphs. It was all just a cycle. All the wars, all the love, all the poetry and art of the old world would be washed away, forgotten. The new world would be a paradise, but a paradise built on the unmarked grave of everything that came before. She thought about the gods who survived. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, would arrive holding their father's hammer, Mjolnir. A relic from a dead world. Balder and Hoder would return from the land of the dead, their old conflict resolved, but to what end? They were ghosts in their own new home. There was a profound sadness to it. They would sit and talk of the past, of the great battles and the mighty beings they once knew. They would remember the runes of Odin, the father they had lost. They were survivors, yes, but they were also eternal mourners. The new world was not for them. It was for a future they could only watch, not truly participate in. Elise traced the lines of the poem with her finger. She found the part about the golden game pieces. The gods in the new world would find the golden chess, like pieces they had played with at the very beginning of time. It was a small detail, but it haunted her. It suggested that this had all happened before, that the gods themselves were just pieces in a game far older and larger than they could comprehend. Were they just repeating a cycle, destined to build a world that would inevitably be destroyed again? Was Ragnarök not a singular event, but a recurring season of cosmic death? That was the true terror. Not the fire and the flood, but the idea that it was all meaningless. A beautiful, tragic, heroic story that the universe would write, erase, and then write again, over and over for eternity. The survival was not a comfort. It was a sentence, a life spent remembering a world that no longer existed, waiting for the cycle to inevitably begin its slow, grinding turn back towards the end once more. Number 15, 2 humans will survive to repopulate the earth. His name was Gunnar Rolfsson, and he was a woodcarver in Trondheim. The year was 1021. Christianity was the law of the land, enforced by the king. But the old stories were not so easily silenced. They were told in whispers around the fire, carved into bedposts and the handles of tools. Gunnar was carving a chest for a wealthy landowner. The man had asked for scenes from the life of Christ. Gunnar carved them dutifully. But on the inside of the lid, where only the owner would see, he carved a different story. He carved a tree, a great sprawling tree, and hidden within its trunk, he carved 2 small figures, a man and a woman. He was carving the story of Lif and Lifthrasir, a life and the will to live. He had heard the tale from his grandfather. When the great fire of Surtur burned the world and the waters of the serpent drowned the lands, these 2 humans would find refuge. They would not hide in a great boat or be saved by a god's intervention. They would hide inside the world tree itself, Yggdrasil. The very thing that held the cosmos together would be their shelter. They would sleep through the destruction. They would survive on the morning dew. When the new green earth rose from the sea, they would emerge. Well, they would be the new Adam and Eve. From them, all the people of the new world would descend. As Gunnar worked the wood, chipping away small curls with his knife, he thought about what that would be like. The silence, the profound, crushing loneliness. To be the last 2 people alive, to walk through a world that was entirely empty. No cities, no villages, not even the ruins of the old world. The poem said the earth would be pristine, unblemished. Everything they had ever known, their family, their friends, their home would be gone. Not just dead, but erased from existence. Their burden was terrifying. They had to repopulate the entire world. Every birth would be a struggle against extinction. Every child would carry the weight of humanity's future. Gunnar paused his work. He looked at the 2 small figures he had carved. They were tiny, almost insignificant against the vastness of the tree. He imagined them stepping out into the new world. The sun would be different. The sky would be different. The gods would be different. They would have no history but the one they carried in their memories. They would tell their children stories of Thor and Odin, of a world filled with giants and monsters. But to those children, it would just be mythology, a fairy tale. They would never understand that it was real. Lif and Lifthrasir were not just survivors, they were living relics, the last connection to a dead cosmos. The terror of their story was not in the apocalypse they survived, but in the lonely world they were forced to build afterward. Gunnar closed the lid of the chest. He had carved the saints and the angels on the outside, a story of hope and resurrection. But on the inside, he had hidden a story of survival that felt more like a curse. Number 14, the sun's daughter will rule the new sky. In the year 874, a Viking longship cut through the cold waters of the North Atlantic. Its captain was a man named Floki Vilgerdarsson. He was navigating by the sun and the stars, but mostly by the birds he had brought with him. He was searching for a new land, the one they called Iceland. On a rare clear day, the sun was a low, weak disk in the sky. Floki's navigator, a man named Thorolf, squinted at it. He was a follower of the old ways. He did not see a ball of gas. He saw Sol, the goddess, driving her golden chariot across the heavens. He saw her being chased relentlessly by the wolf skull. Every day was a race. Every sunrise was a victory. Every sunset was a narrow escape. Thorolf had heard the prophecies. He knew that one day the wolf would win. Skull would finally catch the chariot. He would devour the sun goddess. The sky would go black. It was one of the first great signs of Ragnarök. The end of light. But the skalds also sang of what came next. And that was the part that truly unsettled Thorolf as he stood on the pitching deck of the ship. The sun was not just an object. She was a mother. Before the wolf devoured her, Sol would give birth to a daughter who was just as fair and just as bright as she was. After Ragnarök, when the new world had risen from the sea, this daughter would take her mother's place. She would drive a new chariot across a new sky. The light would return, but it would be a different light. It would shine on a world without Odin, without Thor, without the men and women Thorolf had known his whole life. This new sun was not for them. She was the sun for the children of Lif and Lifthrasir. The thought was deeply frightening. It meant that even the celestial bodies, the most constant things in their universe, were mortal. Like, the sun could die. The moon could die. They could be replaced. Thorolf looked away from the sky and back at the gray, endless sea. He felt a profound sense of cosmic instability. Nothing was permanent. Their gods were fated to fall. Their world was fated to drown, and the very light that guided them, the source of warmth and life, was just a temporary guardian of the sky, destined to be replaced by her child. The new sun was a symbol of rebirth, yes, but it was also a tombstone, a constant shining reminder in the sky every single day that the old world and everyone in it had been utterly and completely annihilated. The light of the new world was born from the death of the old. It was a terrifying legacy for a young goddess to carry. And for Thorolf, it made the familiar sun hanging above him feel fragile, temporary, and doomed. Number 13, the gods who survive are not the ones you expect. Snorri Sturluson dipped his quill in ink. It was the early 13th century in Iceland. He was a chieftain, a politician, and a historian. He was trying to preserve the old stories before they were completely eroded by time and the new Christian faith. He was compiling what would become known as the Prose Edda, a handbook for aspiring poets who needed to understand the complex web of Norse mythology. He wrote of Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength. He wrote of Freyja's beauty and Loki's cunning. These were the main characters, the great powers who shaped the world. But when he came to the chapter on Ragnarök, the list of survivors was strange. It was a list of the quiet ones, the sons, the Avengers. He wrote that after the battle on the plains of Ida, where Asgard once stood, a few gods would gather. Not the great kings and champions, but their heirs. Odin's sons, Vidar and Vali, would be there. Vidar was known for one thing, his thick shoe, made from all the scraps of leather cut by cobblers throughout time. He was the silent god, destined only to avenge his father's death by killing the wolf Fenrir. Vali was also an avenger, a god who was born for the sole purpose of killing Hoder to avenge Baldur's death. They were gods defined by vengeance, not by rule or creation, and they would inherit the ruins. Then there were Thor's sons, Modi and Magni. Their names meant wrath and strength. They were known for being incredibly strong, even stronger than their father. Magni had once, as a 3-night-old child, lifted the leg of a dead giant off Thor when no other god could. But they were secondary characters. They lived in their father's shadow. Now, their father was gone, his great battle with the Midgard serpent having killed them both. Modi and Magni were left to carry his hammer, Mjolnir, a tool they would now wield in a world that no longer needed a giant slayer. Snorri paused, thinking of the implications. The new pantheon was not one of wisdom, magic, or fertility. It was a pantheon of strength, silence, and vengeance. Gods who were born to fulfill a single violent purpose were now left to govern a peaceful, reborn world. It was a terrifyingly empty inheritance. They were the children of titans left to wander the empty halls of their parents, their great purpose already served. The gods who survived were not the ones who had built the world, but the ones who were built to watch it end. The leadership was gone. The wisdom of Odin was a memory. The protective might of Thor was a story. The new world would be governed by the grief-stricken and the battle-scarred. It was a world born from trauma, and its new rulers were the living embodiment of that trauma. Number 12, Nastrond is a shore of corpses for the wicked. Father Ansgar stood on the coast of Birka, a thriving trade town in Sweden. The year was 830. He was a missionary, sent from the heart of Christian Europe to convert the Norsemen. He preached of heaven and hell, of salvation, for the righteous and eternal damnation for the wicked. The Vikings listened, some with curiosity, some with scorn. One evening, an old skald, a poet named Hjalti, told Ansgar about the Norse version of the afterlife. He did not speak of a fiery pit, but of something far colder and more grotesque. Hjalti spoke of Nastrand, the corpse shore. After Ragnarök, when the world was remade, this place would remain. It was a hall far from the sun. Its doors faced north, the direction of cold and death. The hall itself was not made of wood or stone. It was woven from the spines of serpents. The heads of these snakes all faced inward, dripping venom into the hall. The venom formed rivers that flowed through the great room, and in these rivers of poison waded the damned. The oathbreakers, the murderers, the men who had seduced the wives of others, they would wade through the cold venom for eternity. Ansgar was a man who believed in a literal hell, but this was different. It was not a place of fire and punishment meted out by demons. It was a place of cold, dripping, endless decay. The imagery was so visceral, so specific. A hall woven from living snakes, a river of poison. It was a vision of biological horror, not divine retribution. Hjalti's tone was not one of warning, but of grim acceptance. This was simply the way things were. A place for the rot to collect. The skald continued. He told Ansgar that this was not the only punishment. After wading in the venom, the souls would be sent to a spring called Vergelmir. There, the great dragon, Nidhogger, would come. He would chew on their bodies. Not to destroy them, but just to gnaw on them. An endless torment. Ansgar, the Christian missionary, was horrified. His hell was a place of order, a system of justice, however harsh. This Norse afterlife was a place of chaotic, primal horror. It was a cosmic sewer. The terror was not in the pain, but in the degradation. To have your soul, your very essence, reduced to something for a great beast to chew on like gristle. It was an end without dignity, a punishment of utter filth. Ansgar spent that night in prayer, but the image of the serpent-woven hall and the cold venom rivers would not leave his mind. Number 11, the black dragon Nidhogger will feast on the dead. In the summer of 1887, a British archaeologist named James Mills was overseeing a dig on the Isle of Man. They were excavating a series of Viking graves. In one, they found a beautifully carved stone cross. It was a clear fusion of Christian and Norse beliefs. One side depicted the crucifixion, the other side was covered in scenes from Norse mythology. At the very bottom of the carving, below the feet of a figure that was likely Odin, was a coiled, serpent-like creature. It was gnawing on the roots of a great tree, which represented Yggdrasil. Mills recognized it immediately. It was Nidhogger, the Malice Striker. Nidhogger was a primordial force. He was not a god or a giant. He was a draugr, a dragon, a being that existed at the very roots of the world, in the darkness, beneath everything. For all of time, he gnawed on the roots of Yggdrasil, trying to destroy the cosmos from below. He lived in the realm of Niflheim, the world of mist and darkness. He was the embodiment of the universe's slow, inevitable decay. The carver of this cross, some 900 years earlier, had understood this. Even within a Christian context, he could not abandon the fear of the thing that gnawed at the foundation of reality. Mills thought about the role Nidhogger played in the final act of Ragnarök. The poem said that after the world was destroyed and reborn, after the new gods gathered, a final, terrifying vision would appear. A dark dragon would fly up from the mountains of Nida. It was Nidhogger. He would fly over the new green earth, and in his wings he would carry the corpses of the dead. He was not just a destroyer of worlds, he was a hauler of the dead. A cosmic scavenger. The terror of this image was profound. Even in the reborn world, the paradise that followed the apocalypse, the shadow of the old world's death would still linger. Nidhogger was the final echo of the horror. He was a flying cemetery, a reminder that the new world was built on a foundation of death. He was not there to attack the new world, he was just there, a feature of the new landscape, a black dragon carrying dead bodies across the sky of a perfect green earth. It was a deeply unsettling, almost surreal final scene. It meant that there was no clean slate. The trauma of the end would be carried, literally, on the wings of a monster, forever flying over the heads of the survivors. The past was not a memory, it was a monster in the sky. Number 10, the battlefield is a plane called Vigridr. Henrik Bjarnason was a cartographer. In the year 1852, he was working for the Danish government, mapping the remote volcanic interior of Iceland. It was a lonely job. He spent weeks with just a horse, a tent, and his surveying equipment. He measured the land, the vast empty plains of volcanic rock and ash. The landscape was brutal and alien. It was easy to see how his ancestors had imagined it to be the home of giants and monsters. One evening, in his tent, he was reading a copy of the Eddas. He came to the description of the final battlefield. The place was called Vigridr, the plain of battle. The text was shockingly specific about its size. It was 100 leagues in every direction. Henrik did a quick calculation. A league was a measure of distance, roughly 3 miles, so the battlefield would be a square, 300 miles long and 300 miles wide. 90,000 square miles. Henrik lowered his book and stared out at the dark, empty land around him. The entire country of Iceland was only 40,000 square miles. The battlefield of the gods was more than twice the size of his whole nation. The scale was incomprehensible. It was not a battle. It was a geographical event. All the forces of the cosmos would converge on this single vast plain. Odin and the gods of Asgard. The Einherjar, the host of slain warriors from Valhalla. From the east, the giants would arrive in their ship. From the north, the ship of the dead, Nagfar, would bring the armies of hell. From the south, the fire giant Surtur would lead his sons, their swords burning brighter than the sun. And, Loki would be there with the monsters of hell, all of them, on one field. Henrik tried to picture it. The sheer logistics were terrifying, an army of millions, perhaps billions, converging on a single spot. The noise, the chaos, the poem described it as a clash that would shake the foundations of the earth. But for Henrik, the surveyor, the most terrifying detail was the measurement, 100 leagues by 100 leagues. It was a number meant to break the human imagination. It turned the battle from a heroic struggle into a mathematical certainty of total annihilation. There was no room for strategy or heroism on a field that large, filled with that many combatants. There was only the certainty of being swallowed by the sheer mass of it all. It was a battlefield so large, it ceased to be a place on Earth and became the entire world. Standing in the middle of Iceland's vast, empty highlands, Henrik felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The end of the world had a map, and it was bigger than any map he could ever draw. Number 9, the Einherjar, Odin's chosen warriors, will finally march to war. In 1974, archaeologists were digging at a site in Derbyshire, England. The place was called Repton, once a capital of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia. They uncovered a mass grave. It contained the bones of at least 264 people. The bones were overwhelmingly male, and many showed signs of violent death. Radiocarbon dating placed the burial in the late 9th century. This was the resting place of the Viking Great Army that had wintered at Repton in 873. It was a warrior burial on an industrial scale. Dr. Martin Biddle, one of the lead archaeologists, looked over the jumble of bones. He thought of the Viking concept of Valhalla, Odin's Great Hall. Every day, the chosen warriors, the Einherjar, would fight each other to the death on the plains of Asgard. Every evening, their wounds would heal, and they would be resurrected. They would then feast on the meat of a boar that magically regenerated every day and drink mead from a goat whose udders flowed with an endless supply of alcohol. It sounded like a warrior's paradise. But it wasn't a paradise, it was a training camp. The entire purpose of the Einherjar was to prepare for a single-day Ragnarök. They were not being rewarded for their bravery in life. They were being conscripted into a celestial army for a war that they were destined to lose. The terror of Valhalla was its purpose. All that feasting, all that fighting, it was all just a prelude to their second and final death. The poem Grimnismal describes Valhalla as having 540 doors, and when the Horn of Heimdallr sounds, 800 Einherjar will march out of each door. Biddle did the math in his head. That was 432,000 warriors, and that was just one hall. These men in the mass grave at Repton had likely believed in this. They had fought and died in the hope of being chosen by Odin's Valkyries. They wanted to join that great army. They saw it as an honor, but looking at it from a 20th century perspective, Biddle saw a tragedy. They were cogs in a divine war machine. Their afterlife was an endless boot camp for a suicide mission. When the day of Ragnarok arrived, they would march out onto the plain of Vigridr. They would fight alongside the gods, and they would all be slaughtered. Their first death on Earth had bought them a ticket to a second, more final death at the end of the world. The promise of Valhalla was not one of eternal life, but of a delayed and much more spectacular death. The mass grave at Repton was not just a historical site, it was a monument to a belief system where the ultimate reward for a life of battle was to die in an even bigger battle at the end of time. And number 8, the Bifrost Bridge will shatter. John was a stonemason in Cumbria in the north of England. The year was around 950. He was part of a team working on a tall stone cross for the churchyard at Gosforth. The priest wanted scenes from the Bible to teach the largely illiterate population, but John and the other carvers were of Norse descent. Their families had settled here a generation or two ago, and while they were Christians now, they had not forgotten the old stories. So they carved both. They carved the crucifixion of Christ. And on another panel, they carved a figure with a horn and a sword, guarding a bridge against a host of monsters. They were carving Heimdallr, the guardian of the Bifrost. The Bifrost was the bridge between Midgard, the world of humans, and Asgard, the home of the gods. It was described as a rainbow, a shimmering, trembling bridge of 3 colors. It was beautiful, but it was also the gods' greatest strategic vulnerability. It was the only way for the forces of destruction to reach Asgard. Heimdallr stood guard day and night. He could hear grass growing on the earth and wool growing on sheep. He required less sleep than a bird. He was the perfect sentry. His job was to watch for the beginning of the end. As John chipped away at the hard stone, he thought about the bridge. It was the pathway to the divine, but it was also fragile. The poem said that the bridge was strong enough to hold the weight of the gods riding across it. But it was not strong enough for the final onslaught. When Ragnarok began, the sons of Muspel, the fire giants from the south, would ride across it. They would be led by Surtur, their great leader, and under their combined fiery weight, the beautiful rainbow bridge would shatter. It would crumble and fall into the abyss below. The terror of this detail was profound. The connection between the human world and the divine world would be severed permanently. The gods would be trapped in Asgard, their home turned into a fortress under siege. Humanity would be left alone in Midgard, watching the sky as the gods fought their final doomed battle. The breaking of the Bifrost was an act of cosmic isolation. It was the moment the gods were cut off, and humanity was abandoned. John finished the carving of Heimdallr blowing his great horn, the Galarhorn. It was the signal that the end had begun. The sound would be heard in all worlds. It was the sound of the bridge breaking, the sound of the gods preparing to die alone. The stone cross in Gosforth would stand for over 1,000 years, a silent testament to that terrifying moment of separation. Number 7 Surtur, the fire giant, will scorch the earth. In the year 934, the volcano Eldgjá in Iceland erupted. It was one of the largest eruptions in recorded history. A fissure nearly 40 miles long split the earth open, spewing lava and a cloud of sulfurous gas that covered much of Europe and Asia. For the Norse settlers living in Iceland, it must have felt like the world was ending. The sun was blotted out by ash. The ground shook. Rivers of fire flowed across the land. It is no surprise that their vision of the apocalypse was a fiery one. A farmer named Ketil Bjornsson watched from a safe distance as the lava consumed pastureland that had been green just days before. He saw the stories of the elders made real. He saw the land of Muspelheim, the realm of fire, breaking through to the surface. He saw the work of Surtur. Surtur was the guardian of Muspelheim, a giant of fire. He had been there since before the gods, waiting in the south with his flaming sword. His sword was said to be brighter and hotter than the sun. He was not a character with a complex backstory. He was an inevitability, a force of pure elemental destruction. Ketil had heard the prophecies of the Volva, the seeress. She said that at Ragnarok, Surtur would finally leave his post. He would lead the sons of Muspel north across the shattering Bifrost Bridge to the final battle at Vigridur. He would fight the unarmed god Freyr and kill him, but that was just a prelude. Surtur's true purpose came after the battle was over, after Odin was eaten and Thor had fallen. When the battle was lost and the gods were dead, Surtur would fulfill his final destiny. He would cast the fire from his sword over the entire earth. The world would be consumed by a global firestorm. The great tree Yggdrasil itself, the pillar of the cosmos, would burn. The fire would purify nothing. It would only destroy. It would burn the living and the dead. It would turn the mountains to ash and boil the seas. Ketil, watching the red glow of the Elja eruption paint the underside of the ash cloud, understood this fear in his bones. The gods could be killed by wolves and serpents. But the world itself, the physical planet, would be unmade by fire. Surtur was not just a participant in Ragnarok, he was the final punctuation mark. He was the one who turned out the lights by burning down the house. The terror of Surtur was that he was not evil. He was just a function of the universe, the living embodiment of the final, all-consuming flame that would reduce everything to cinders. Number 6, the ship Nagfar, made of dead men's nails, will set sail. Brother Cormac was a monk at the monastery on Lindisfarne, an island off the coast of northeast England. The year was 1150. His monastery had been one of the first places raided by the Vikings centuries ago, but now the Norse had settled and become part of the local fabric. Cormac's task was to copy and illuminate manuscripts, but his secret passion was collecting the pagan stories from the old men and women in the nearby villages. He wrote them down in a private ledger, convinced it was better to understand the devil's tales than to ignore them. One story in particular made him feel physically ill. It was the story of the ship, Nagfar. An old fisherman told him that at the dawn of Ragnarok, a great ship would be loosed from its moorings. This was Nagfar, the nail ship. It was the largest ship ever built, and it was made entirely from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. Every time a person died with untrimmed nails, they contributed building materials to this horrific vessel. The fisherman explained it as a solemn duty. You had to trim the nails of your dead kin. It was a small, final act of love, but also an act of defiance against the end of the world. So, by trimming the nails, you were delaying the completion of Nagfar. Cormac was repulsed. The level of macabre detail was astounding. He imagined generations upon generations of people, their unkempt nails growing even after death, all being harvested for this one purpose. The ship was a monument to humanity's disrespect for its dead. It was built from negligence. The terror was not just in its construction material, but in who would sail it. The poem said the ship would be captained by the giant Rim. It would carry the armies of Jotunheimer, the land of the giants, to the final battle. Some versions of the myth even said that a freed Loki would be at its helm, steering the ship made of human detritus towards Asgard. Cormac tried to picture the ship. It would not be white or black, but a pale, keratinous yellow-gray. It would creak and groan, not like wood, but like something organic and dead. It would be crewed by the enemies of the gods, sailing to war in a vessel built from the cast-off parts of humanity. It was the ultimate insult. Humanity, which the gods were sworn to protect, would unwittingly provide the materials for the vessel that carried their destroyers. The detail was so specific, so personal, it brought the cosmic scale of Ragnarok down to the level of a corpse's fingertip. That night, Brother Cormac found himself staring at his own hands, at the pale crescents of his fingernails, and he felt a deep and profound dread. Number 5, the Midgard serpent will drown the world in venom. Leif was a fisherman who lived in a small village on the coast of Norway. The year was 990. His world was the sea. He knew its moods, its dangers, and its gifts. He also knew the stories. He knew that the ocean was not empty. He knew that somewhere in its deepest, darkest trenches lay Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. He was one of Loki's monstrous children. Odin had cast him into the sea when he was just a child, but he grew. He grew so large that he encircled the entire world, Midgard, and could bite his own tail. He was the boundary of the known world. As long as he slept, the world was stable. One day, Leif and his son were caught in a violent, sudden storm. The waves rose like mountains. The sky turned a sickly green-yellow. The boat was tossed about like a piece of driftwood. Leif gripped the steering oar, his knuckles white. He was not just fighting the wind and the water. In his mind, he was fighting the serpent. He imagined the great beast stirring in its sleep, its coils shifting on the ocean floor, causing the great waves that threatened to swallow them. The fear of Jormungandr was the fear of the ocean's true monstrous power. The prophecy of Ragnarök was clear about the serpent's role. When the end times began, Jormungandr would awaken in a full world-shattering rage. He would release his tail from his mouth. His massive body would thrash, causing catastrophic earthquakes and tidal waves that would swamp the coastal lands. As he would not just be in the sea, he would rise from it. He would rear his head up into the sky, his vast mouth gaping. And he would spray his venom. He would spew his poison across the whole of the world. The venom would fill the air and poison the water. It would rain down on the earth, killing every living thing it touched. Leif fought to keep his boat from capsizing. He could taste the salt spray, and in his mind it was the serpent's venom. The terror of Jormungandr was not just his size, but his toxicity. He was a weapon of mass poisoning. His final act was to make the world completely uninhabitable. He was fated to fight his old nemesis, Thor. The god of thunder would finally kill the serpent. He would smash its head with his hammer. But it would be a hollow victory. After killing the beast, Thor would stagger back 9 paces, and then he would fall down dead, drowned in the torrent of venom that poured from the serpent's corpse. The protector of mankind would be killed by the very world he was trying to save, now made toxic by his greatest foe. The storm finally passed, and Leif guided his damaged boat back to the village. He was safe for now, but he knew that the serpent was still down there, sleeping, waiting for the day when it would rise and poison the sky. Number 4, the wolf Fenrir will break his unbreakable chain. In 1895, a Danish farmer plowing his field near Tullstorp in Sweden hit a large stone. When he cleared the dirt away, he found it was a runestone erected sometime in the 11th century. On it was a carving of a great ship, and above it a massive 4-legged beast. Its jaws were wide open. It was Fenrir, the Great Wolf. The farmer knew the story. Every child in Scandinavia knew the story of Fenrir. He was another of Loki's children, a brother to the Midgard serpent. When he was a pup, the gods brought him to Asgard. But he grew at an alarming rate. Soon only the god Tyr dared to feed him. The gods saw the danger he posed. They saw the destruction he would one day cause, so they decided to bind him. They tried twice with great chains of iron, but Fenrir broke them easily. So Odin sent a messenger down to the realm of the dwarves, Svartalfheim. He commissioned them to make a chain that could not be broken. The dwarves made a fetter called Gleipnir. It looked like a silken ribbon, but it was made from 6 impossible things: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. The gods took the wolf to an island and challenged him to break this new ribbon. Fenrir was suspicious. He said he would only allow them to put it on him if one of the gods placed their hand in his mouth as a show of good faith. Only Tyr was brave enough to do it. He placed his right hand in the wolf's jaws. The other gods tied Fenrir with Gleipnir. The wolf struggled, but the magical ribbon only grew tighter the more he fought. When he realized he was trapped, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. The gods laughed, all except Tyr. They tied the chain to a great stone and jammed a sword in the wolf's mouth to keep his jaws propped open. And there they left him, bound and howling for centuries. The farmer looked at the carving on the runestone. The real terror of the story was not the wolf's strength, but the god's actions. They had raised him. They had betrayed him, they had bound him with a trick, and they knew through their prophecies that the chain would not hold forever. At the start of Ragnarok, all bonds would be broken, and that included Gleipnir. Fenrir would finally break free. He would be a creature of pure accumulated rage. The poem described his charge into battle. His lower jaw would scrape the earth, and his upper jaw would touch the sky. Fire would burn from his eyes and nostrils. He would be an engine of vengeance. He would charge across the battlefield and find the one who had ordered his capture. He would find Odin, the Allfather, and he would swallow him whole. The king of the gods, the wisest and most powerful, would be unceremoniously eaten by the wolf they had created and betrayed. The breaking of the chain was not just an event, it was the consequence of the gods' own fear and deceit coming back to devour them. Number 3, Loki will be freed and lead the armies of the dead. On the Danish island of Funen, in 1950, a man was digging in his garden in the village of Snaptune. He found a stone about the size of a human head. It was a soapstone carved on one side. It had been used as a hearthstone, a stone placed in front of a blacksmith's bellows to protect it from the fire. The carving on it showed a face. The lips were sewn shut with stitches. Archaeologists identified it as the only known depiction of Loki from the Viking Age. It showed him after he had been punished by the gods for his role in the death of Balder. The story was one of the darkest in the mythology. As punishment, the gods took Loki to a cave. They turned his son Vali into a wolf, who then killed his other son, Narfi. The gods then used Narfi's entrails to bind Loki to 3 sharp rocks. The entrails turned to iron. Then the goddess Skadi placed a venomous snake on a rock above his head, so that its poison would drip onto his face for all eternity. Loki's loyal wife Sigyn sat with him, holding a bowl to catch the venom, but when the bowl was full, she had to leave to empty it. And in those moments, the venom dripped onto Loki. He would writhe in agony, and his thrashing would cause earthquakes. The family that owned the Snaptune hearthstone would have seen that stitched mouth face every day as they worked their forge. It was a constant reminder of Loki's punishment. He was the trickster, the god of chaos, but he was also one of them, an Aesir god living in Asgard. His punishment was a brutal family affair, and like the binding of Fenrir, it was temporary. The prophecy was absolute. When Ragnarok begins, all bonds will break. That meant the iron entrails binding Loki would snap. He would be free. And his rage would be immeasurable. The years of torture would have burned away any loyalty or affection he had for the gods. He would become their greatest enemy. He would go to Hell, the realm of the dead, and he would gather an army. And he would become the general of the dishonored dead. The poem states he will be the helmsman of the ship Nagfar, or that he will lead the armies of Hell from the north. And he would lead this force of decay and death against his former family. The terror of Loki's role is that he is the ultimate insider threat. He knows the gods' strengths. He knows their weaknesses. He knows Asgard's defenses. He helped build them. The final war is not just against monsters and giants. It is a civil war, a family drama playing out on a cosmic scale, with the ultimate traitor leading the forces of annihilation against the brothers who tortured him. The face in the stone was not just a warning, it was a promise of vengeance. Number 2, the sun and moon will be eaten by wolves. In August of the year 840, a total solar eclipse passed over Europe. The Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious, son of Charlemagne, was said to have been so terrified by the event that it contributed to his death. And for the Vikings in the north, such an event was not just a strange astronomical phenomenon, it was a dress rehearsal for the apocalypse. It was a glimpse of the moment when the sky would finally be devoured. A young woman named Astrid lived in a village near the Kaupang market in Norway. She watched as the sky darkened in the middle of the day. The birds stopped singing. A strange coldness fell over the land. The elders in her village began to chant and beat on pots and pans. They were trying to scare away the wolf. Astrid knew the story. 2 great wolves haunted the sky. One named Skoll Treachery chased the sun's soul. The other, named Hati Hate, chased the moon Mani. They were the children or brothers of Fenrir, a family of celestial predators. Every day, the sun and moon fled across the sky. Every eclipse, lunar or solar, was a near miss. It was a sign that the wolves were getting closer, growing stronger. The chase was the engine of time. It was what made the days and nights pass. But it was a chase that had a foregone conclusion. The Voluspa was very clear. At the start of Ragnarök, the chase would end. Skoll would finally catch the sun. Hati would finally catch the moon. They would swallow the celestial bodies. The terror of this is the totality of the darkness. You know, it is not just a night without a moon. It is a world without any light at all. The source of all life and warmth would be gone, consumed. The stars, now the only light in the sky, would also vanish, falling into the sea. The universe would be plunged into a blackness that was absolute and final. It was the death of light itself. For people like Astrid, who lived by the seasons and the sun, this was the most fundamental horror imaginable. It was the unraveling of the very fabric of existence. The world would become a cold, dark, silent tomb. This act was the true starting gun for the final battle. The darkness was the signal for all the other monsters to emerge. The earth would begin to tremble violently. The mountains would fall. The forests would be uprooted. The bonds holding Fenrir and Loki would snap in the blackness. The eating of the sun and moon was not just a part of Ragnarök. It was the event that allowed all the other horrors to happen. It was the moment the lights went out and the monsters were free to come out and play. Astrid watched as the light slowly returned to her village. The eclipse was over, but the fear remained. The wolf had been scared away this time, but one day it would not be. Number 1. The first sign is Fimbulwinter, 3 winters with no summer. The Bjorn grunted as he pulled the last of his fishing boats onto the shore. The wind was cold, far too cold for late spring. The year was 1012 in northern Norway. The winter had been long and brutal. They had lost several of their older villagers to the cold and the hunger. Now, as the time for planting approached, the snows had not retreated. The ground was still frozen solid. A new layer of snow had fallen just last night, blanketing the dark, hard earth in a fresh layer of white. There would be no planting this year. The oldest man in the village, a one-eyed man named Eric, who claimed to remember the days before the Christian kings, sat by the cold fire pit, wrapped in furs. He did not speak of a long winter. He used another word. He whispered it like a curse. Fimbulwinter, the great winter. It was the first sign, the beginning of the end. The prophecy was not about a sudden, fiery apocalypse. It started slowly. It started with the cold. Fimbulwinter was not one winter. It was 3 full winters in a row, with no summers in between. The snow would fall from all directions, the winds would be harsh, the frosts would be severe, there would be no break. No thaw, no green shoots. The world would slowly, inexorably freeze to death. The livestock would starve first. Then the people. Society would break down. The poems were explicit about this. All morality would vanish. Brother would kill brother for food. Families would turn on each other. The bonds of kinship, the very foundation of their society, would dissolve in the face of relentless, grinding starvation and cold. The world would be filled with violence and desperation. Bjorn looked at his own family, his wife, his 2 young sons. He looked at his dwindling supply of salted fish and dried meat. He thought of his brother who lived in the next valley. Would they one day be forced to fight over the last scraps of food? The terror of Fimbulwinter was its quiet, creeping nature. It was not a battle with a monster, it was a war against the weather, a war that could not be won. It was a slow, agonizing process of attrition that would wipe out most of humanity before the gods even began their final battle. This was the Great Filter. By the time the wolves ate the sun and moon, by the time Loki broke free, humanity would have already been reduced to a state of savage survivalism. The Great Winter was designed to scour the earth of all warmth, all compassion, all civilization. It was the necessary first step to prepare the world for the final violent cataclysm. It ensured that when the world did end in fire and flood, there would be very few left to witness it. Bjorn went inside his longhouse and added another log to the fire. He did not know if this was just a bad year or if it was the beginning. And that uncertainty, that cold, creeping dread, was the most terrifying thing of all.